Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, we have GV Freeman. He's a founder and self-awareness coach at Founders Thriving. GV, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I was going through your background and I'm extremely excited for this episode. This is a whole new area of my life, which I've never explored, and it's never something which I spent time even understanding. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. For everyone in the audience, GV, could you walk us through what you do and your background?
Yeah, well, those are two very interesting things. So let's start off with what I do. So, as you mentioned, I'm a self awareness coach and I'm the founder of Founders Thriving. And really, what I do is I try and help entrepreneurs, executives, and founders experience some level of success and happiness at the same time. So, it's really that simple. How we do that is through a lot of different techniques, some of which we'll talk about today, obviously, but getting to know yourself. If we believe that true happiness comes from the inside. So whenever I ask somebody, like, where does happiness come from? They always say, yeah, it comes from the inside. And I say, well, why the hell aren't you looking there first? We have been taught to look in a whole bunch of other places. We've been taught to look at like money and fancy cars and big houses and big companies, and we expect all of those things to make us happy, but they can only make us happy for a short period of time. So what I try and help people do is find success and happiness at the same time. How I got here is a really kind of complicated and long story, but the really short version is I grew up in a tiny town of 750 people in the middle of central Nebraska. I spent a year in Belgium when I was in high school as a foreign exchange student. I got exposed to a lot of culture and a lot of interesting people while I was over there, and really got the travel bug. I came back, I finished high school. I spent 3 years in college. My degree is in computer information systems. I started DJing in high school and college. I then left college and spent 2.5 years working for Carnival Cruise Lines as a DJ. I came back, decided to grow up. I started as a corporate trainer. Like, that was kind of my first real job. I moved into marketing, digital marketing, in 2002-ish. Really, we were experiencing kind of Web 2.0, and everybody was wanting and needing a website. So I was literally building websites in Microsoft Front Page and Dreamweaver, and it was the original days of digital marketing. We were hosting all of our own websites. We were managing all of our own spam filters and doing all of that. And then really, I spent 15 years helping and coaching entrepreneurs how to launch and grow their businesses. And in that period of time, starting around 2007, my life sort of started to change, and I started to drop into more self-care, figuring out who I was, cleaning up my life in a lot of ways. So I quit drinking in 2007. I found yoga in 2012. I became a certified yoga teacher in 2013. I ended up drinking ayahuasca with shamans in Peru in 2015. And since 2015, I have really been a spiritual tourist. I have meditated in silence for 10 days in Buddhist traditions. I have sat with a number of different psychedelic medicines and done other expanded states of consciousness work. I study Vedanta, I study Buddhism, I study a little bit of shamanism. And today I mix it all together and try and show entrepreneurs that there is a way to be fulfilled and content and happy running a business, because most people think that it requires a lot of hustle and struggle. And it is, the words that we use to run businesses today are more akin to war than they are to business. And I try and move people away from that.
Wow, that's an incredible story, incredible background. I can take this in so many different ways. So let's back up a little bit before we get into the psychedelics and shamanism, because I do want to talk about that. Why do you think that people are not able to be or you're talking about you could become successful and happy rather than, like, I mean, that's a new concept to me. I just assumed that you if you're successful, you're probably happy, or that's one of my definitions of success, being happy,
Yeah.
right? Not necessarily the material goods. So let's talk more about the success versus happy spectrum.
Yeah, I think that I love the fact that you're willing to even admit, like, I just assume that when I am successful, I'll be happy. Let me tell you the two most common things that I hear from entrepreneurs. Early stage entrepreneurs say, I'll be happy when I make my first $1,000,000. Late stage entrepreneurs say, I'm financially free, I'm successful, and I'm still miserable. Like there's something missing. I did all the things that I wanted to do. I got my big business or I sold my business. I call it post-traumatic exit syndrome. So when you like for tech founders who build their business and then they take an exit and they've got more money than they've ever made in their entire life. And now they've got this big giant hole in their life. And they're like, wait a second, I'm more miserable now having just achieved the thing that I wanted to achieve. They've worked so hard to get money and have a successful exit. And now they're still miserable. So no, those two things do not coincide together. I look at life through like 10 different vertices. And there are 10 different sort of buckets in our life. And we need to fill all of those buckets to have contentment and happiness. Because if we put sort of like the old saying that if you put all your eggs in one basket and somebody steals your basket, they got all your eggs. And if we divide up our eggs into a number of baskets in our life, when one of those baskets gets tipped over, when one of those baskets gets stolen, when one of those baskets gets sold for millions of dollars, we've got eggs in other baskets. So there's a lot of ways to build some consistent level of happiness that does not simply revolve around being a successful entrepreneur.
Got it. So you're saying a lot of entrepreneurs, they put all their eggs into one basket, and when they have that exit, they kind of lose their life's
Yeah,
purpose.
exactly. Because a lot of them have were taught from a very early age. So now, like, you got to get into a good preschool so you can get into a good elementary school. And then if you get into a good elementary school, then you can get into a good high school. And if you get into the right high school, then you can take all the right AP classes that are going to set you up. And then you can join the lacrosse team, and then you can go to Stanford, and then you can start a big startup, and you can get VC money, and you can have a couple of houses and a beautiful partner and lots of money. That is what we are taught from a very early age. Our Western society has said, here is the path to success. And then we insert success equals happiness. Like somewhere along the way, somebody says, well, if you just make enough money, you'll be happy. And we've been taught that for a very long time. And it's not until you get to that point when you're like, wow, I'm successful and I'm also miserable, or there is something missing in my life, or I wish that I didn't wake up feeling so empty inside. That's when people land on my doorstep.
Got it. So they have to go through that pain to even get to what you do.
You're a very quick study. One of my favorite sayings is the pain has to exceed the pleasure before we begin to change. Now, that's not always true. And I do have people in my world that would consider themselves seekers. So they especially some of the younger generation, the younger folks that I coach, they believe that there is more out there. There is a deep component of spirituality that comes into the work that I do. And spirituality is not religion. I don't want to confuse those two things. So spirituality in my world is simply self-knowledge, becoming aware of the self. There is a deep level of spirituality and self-knowledge that younger generations they tend to come into my work with a little more gusto. If you're a little bit older, if you're probably in your 40s or 50s or even 60s right now, you have been indoctrinated into this American dream that is not really true. In fact, I do a lot of speaking on a concept that I call waking up from the American dream.
Well, let's go into that. Talk about the waking up. Sorry, what was it called?
Waking up from the American dream.
Yeah, let's talk about waking up from the American dream.
I think it's helpful to understand kind of where this came from. James Truslow Adams actually started talking about, I think, the first kind of written definition of the American dream came in 1931. He wrote it in Epic of America. And he said that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. So again, better, richer, and fuller according to ability or achievement. This is the idea that so many of us have grown up with, this idea of the American dream. And in large part, I find no direct correlation between happiness and ability or achievement. Now, there is a way, they've done studies about happiness, and you can make, I think it's somewhere between $75,000 and $85,000 adjusted for your cost of living, that their happiness does not significantly increase when we make more than, let's say, $70,000. We have our basic needs met, and we do not get significantly happier when we make more money. Now, there is a level of freedom and choice that do come about the 120,000 mark. When you make 120,000, you get to go on vacations, you have some money in the bank, it makes your stress level decrease. So let's say somewhere between 70 and 120,000, you're going to be pretty much as happy as you're going to be. Everything, all the happiness after that has to come from the inside. And that is contradictory to the American dream that we have been taught. So when I tell people it's time to wake up from the American dream, it's literally just simply waking up and saying, I'm going to start searching for happiness in a different place.
Got it. So what is happiness? Is it a way to quantify it, or is it all qualities?
I can only say that, like, happiness is how I feel on a day-to-day basis. Here's the way that I'll answer this question. And here's the way that I choose to define happiness and joy. Now, this might not be the scientific definition. I'm just going to tell you how I work with people. Happiness is my relative mood on a day-to-day basis. So if you think of a frowny face on one end and a big giant smiley face on the other end, frowny face is not very happy. Super smiley face is pretty happy. So on a day-to-day basis, I would ask you, like, are you closer to the frowny face or are you closer to the happy face? That is your, like, happiness set point. And we know over the course of time that if you do practices to increase your happiness set point will increase over time. I can tell you that 15 years ago, when I was drinking and overweight, I was way closer to frowny face. Today, I would say, like, I'm not in, like, super smiley face. Like, I don't have rad days every day, but I would say that I'm a 4 out of 5, 9 out of 10 days. That is happiness. That is my day-to-day average of how I feel. Joy, think of joy as the roller coaster is climbing that big hill, and you get to the top of the hill, and the roller coaster goes over that hill, and people scream and they throw their hands up in the air. Like, those are moments of joy. Joy is like moments when your child is born. When you just experience these amazing events in your life. And I don't know if I can sustain joy on a day-to-day basis. I can absolutely sustain happiness.
Got it. So joy is very short-term, short-lived, kind of spikes, but happiness is actually a prolonged state.
That's my definition. Now, you could probably talk to, and the definition is going to be different if you talk to some Swami in Rishikesh, India, to a scientist that is measuring fMRI studies of people's brains. So I think that you have to sort of define what happiness means to you, but that's how I define it.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about. I guess you said you quit drinking 15 years ago or so, and then you got into all of the ayahuasca and shamanism and Buddhism. Let's talk about that journey. What made that switch? How did you even get introduced to it coming from America?
Well, the true reality is I quit drinking because the court system in Custer County, Nebraska said, we don't think you should continue drinking. You're a danger to society. So I make no bones about that. Recovery and from alcohol is a big part of my story. And I wouldn't be here today working with people in the way that I do today if I was still drinking. So uh, that is a huge and was the true first step on the path. How I made it to Peru, I started therapy in 2012. In the middle of therapy, I showed up at a yoga class. I bought a Groupon, like 15 classes for $35. And I had just ran Tough Mudder. I was ultra competitive all through high school and college. I coached competitive softball. I coached competitive baseball. I was running Tough Mudder, 15 miles, like super hard journey, getting electrocuted, carrying somebody over my back. And I said, I'm going to run a marathon, so I need to gain some flexibility. So I ended up in a yoga class. And yoga was and I had been trying to meditate for 5 years. And yoga was the first place I ever actually felt like I was meditating. I couldn't sit on a cushion and go into this meditative space. And I honestly, I don't do it very well today. So for anybody out there, just as a quick side note, for anybody out there who says, I can't meditate, I have to, I keep having thoughts, I can't stop the thoughts. Well, either can I. And that's not what you're supposed to do. So if that's what you think meditation is and you're saying I'm not doing it, like stop beating yourself up because it's not what meditation is. But I found this peace and calm in yoga that I had never found before. And as I continued my journey of self awareness in therapy, and then I realized that I wanted to go deeper into my yoga tradition, my yoga teacher training, I met a shaman and we did some really deep work together. But I couldn't ever really get to where I wanted. I always thought that there was something wrong. I always thought that I wouldn't have used these words back then, but I thought that something needed to be fixed. And I guess the other version of that is I thought that I was broken. I wouldn't have used those words, but I thought that something needed to be fixed. So she said, well, the only other advice I have for you is to go like meet with one of my friends in Peru and sit with ayahuasca. So I called this woman and she said, well, I just happen to have a group going to Peru in about 2 months. You're welcome to join us if you want. So I did. Like the universe gave me this opportunity. So I showed up in the jungle of Peru in 2015. I had a really, really challenging first night of of ayahuasca, but I also had a maybe my first true spiritual mystical experience as a result of that. Um, that was in 2015, and I will tell you the as much as entheogens, hallucinogens, psychedelics, whatever word you want to choose to use, as much as they have positively changed my life. It was not until 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and I was sitting in silent meditation for 10 days. And on the third day, I had an experience, and the thought that I was broken was taken away from me. So it took another 5 years of doing deep, deep spiritual work before I finally let go of that untrue thought. And that did not happen with psychedelics. It did happen in an expanded state of consciousness. So when when I talk about how people change and rocket fuel for psychological, emotional, spiritual growth, I often talk about expanded states of consciousness rather than just psychedelics, because meditation can take you to that expanded state. Holotropic breath work, just simply using your breath, can take you into an expanded state of consciousness. And those states are incredibly powerful when we're doing healing work on ourselves.
Wow, that's incredible. I want to talk more about your first night using ayahuasca. Could you talk about that experience?
um, sure, I could talk about it. I am like a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm like a lot of people that, well, there's I think two really specific components that go into making this happen. First, my childhood was not the easiest childhood. Um, I learned how to survive on my own in a lot of ways. I learned how to take care of myself on my own. My parents were very young when they had me, and I lived in a tiny little town, so we could kind of do whatever we wanted to. I sort of just roamed the streets in some cases. In a town of 700 people in the middle of central Nebraska, you could do that in the 80s. So it's not like there was child abuse or anything like that. But I sort of became very self-sufficient. Also, like going to Belgium at 15 years old, I was a very self-sufficient human being. I had developed emotional and mental strategies that allowed me to control my environment. So control is a big piece of this. The second thing is, as an entrepreneur, the ability to figure things out, the the ability to strategize. Like those two components, the ability to strategize and the ability to control one's environment, are not great characteristics to have when you do sacred medicine work, when you use hallucinogens for healing. The control mechanism is what one might call the ego, the spiritual ego. This is not the personality ego, like I think I'm better than everybody else. We call this the spiritual ego, but that is a level of control that my mind doesn't want to let go of. So my first journey with ayahuasca, I'm sitting there drinking the first cup, and I wait and I wait and I wait, and nothing ever happens. So then we go up and drink the second cup, and we're in the middle of the jungle. We're in a maloka. The shaman is singing traditional icaros. I'm with 3 or 4 other people, and we all go up and drink our second cup. And I hear all the other people in the maloka start having an experience. Some people are crying. Some people are purging. That's one of the characteristics of ayahuasca, is you purge. And I'm still not feeling anything. So I wait a little bit. And again, the shaman doesn't speak English. It's completely dark. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling. Like, I'm the gringo in Peru. And I think, okay, I'm doing this wrong. Or I also think, like, this isn't going to work. So I go and I ask our sort of guide, hey, I don't know what to do. Like, should I go drink more? And she said, okay, well, go drink more then. So I go up and I drink my third cup of ayahuasca. And I go back and I sit on my mat. And I don't know how long it was, 30 or 45 minutes, and still nothing happened. And at this point, I'm angry. Like, I tell myself, well, this is stupid. You just paid like $5,000 to come to Peru for 2 weeks. Your whole purpose for coming down here was to do this work and to get healed. And like, all these expectations that I had were affecting my mind's ability to receive the medicine. So I just said, fine, I'm going to give up. Like, it's just not going to work for me. So I laid down on my mat and I started to fall asleep. And I don't know how long it was, but I would say the minute that my body relaxed enough to let the medicine work, I rolled over and purged what I thought was something the size of a beach ball. And I was shot to the stars. And in some ways, I was shown I was introduced to a power that's much greater than myself, and I was sort of shown how the universe was created. So it was a really challenging experience. And it was my first introduction to truly how much control and how strong my spiritual ego was. And that has been something that I've continued to work on, for 10 years now, almost.
That's an incredible story. So you said you felt something even more powerful years later when you did the 10-day silent meditation. So moving on to that, could you talk about what the 10-day meditation was like?
So I sat in what's called Vipassana. It's a very, very old Buddhist tradition. You wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you start meditating at 4:30. You meditate for a couple of hours, you have some breakfast, you meditate for a couple of hours, you have some lunch, you meditate for a couple of hours, you have some tea, you meditate for a couple of hours with some breaks in the middle. But it's about 12 hours of meditation every day. It's all done in silence. So there's no talking, there's no reading, there's no writing. You don't work out, you don't dance, you don't do yoga. All you do is meditate, eat, and sleep. And what happens is your focus gets incredibly concentrated. And for the first time in my entire life, after 3 days of meditation, I finally felt all of the thoughts simply disappear. My Vedanta teacher, used to say that enlightenment exists between the thoughts. So when we can slow the thoughts down, and there was many times in this experience in these 10 days where I could quite literally experience a thought rising into my consciousness. I could evaluate, I could look at the thought, I could see the thought, and then I could see the thought go away. And then there was a period where there just was no thought. And while I don't know if it was as powerful as meeting God and understanding how the universe was created, from a cosmic perspective, from an interpersonal perspective, in this moment where, and I didn't even realize it until maybe a month later, that really what had happened is I stopped thinking that I was broken. I stopped trying to fix myself. There was something that happened in the middle of this Vipassana retreat. And that's what Vipassana is. It's the process of sweeping through your body with with a very finely tuned consciousness and finding the parts of you that are no longer necessary. And you become, he uses, Goenka is the teacher, and he uses the term equanimous. We become, we have equanimity towards all of the experiences that we have. So if it feels good, we regard it and let it go. If it feels bad, we regard it and let it go. We don't attach to the positive or the negative. And one of the moments inside of this meditation retreat, I was able to let go of the thought that I needed to be fixed. And it changed my life forever.
That's absolutely incredible. I'm getting chills just listening to both of these stories. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What are some, I guess, applicable steps that entrepreneurs can take using your experiences using both of these or through both of these activities?
I'll talk about the two simplest, most straightforward ways. They're straightforward for me. They might not be entirely straightforward for your listeners. I created Founders Thriving at the beginning of 2021 with the intention to give entrepreneurs, founders, and executives an opportunity to experience all of the best parts of my journey. So I have traveled all over the world and I have experienced all sorts of crazy stuff. And what I like to think is, like, I've done the research for you. So what I did in 2021 was I took 9 entrepreneurs to Nicaragua for 6 days. We dropped them into an amazing eco lodge on a private beach. And for 6 days we do yoga, meditation, and breath work every day. There's a couple of hours of thought work where we're learning about ourselves, how we view ourselves, what makes us tick, where we get our self-worth from. So I do a lot of work with self-worth. There is also opportunities in that experience to have expanded states of consciousness. So a lot of people have heard about microdosing. One day we do a microdose. Another day we do holotropic breath work. Another day we do a full psilocybin journey. And then there's a full day of integration. So that is one way that people can begin to really learn about themselves. Another way that is a little less rigorous as far as traveling to a Central American country, I also have a program called Deep Inner Work. And the DEEP is an acronym for discover, excavate, experiment, and prosper. First, we discover who we are through a series of questions and working individually and in groups. Excavate is getting rid of the things that hold us back from who we truly want to be. This is typically resentments, fears, harms done to others, and sexual misconduct. Those are the four primary weights that people haul around. So we let go to the best of our ability. We let go of those things. Experimentation is something that I bring straight from the Buddhist practice, is that when we feel something, when we actually feel an experience in our body, we don't have to remember it anymore. So when you go to a conference and you're looking at a PowerPoint presentation and everybody takes pictures of slides and say, oh, I'm going to go back and implement this into my day-to-day life. And rarely does anybody really take a whole bunch of stuff from conferences. Like, we go there, we have an experience, we might enjoy ourselves, but we don't ever go back and implement a lot of that stuff. So Founders Thriving and the Deep Inner Work program are built to be experiential, because when we experience something, we never have to remember it. We don't have to process it cognitively anymore. It's quite literally been injected into our cellular structure. So experimentation is the act of doing that in a structured way. I have a founder who said, I want to increase play in my work. I want to experience what it would be like to have more play in my work life. So we created an experiment to take the team putt-putt golfing. Now, that was the experiment. I asked him to create a hypothesis ahead of time. If I take my team putt-putt golfing, what will happen? And his initial hypothesis is it will not be any fun. My employees will think that it's stupid and will never do it again. That was the hypothesis. He was projecting his lack of fun and play onto his company and employees. So he ran the experiment. After the experiment, he realized that his thinking was completely wrong and that all of his employees had a great time and they wanted to do putt-putt golf again. That is a way to experience injecting play into your work life. And what we do in the program is we look at the 10 different areas of your life and we run experiments in the areas that need the most help. And then the last piece is prosper, which is really creating a path to who you want to be 10 years from now. And there is some goal setting, there is some intention setting, and there is some storytelling that is a part of that. And we let our minds wander, and we do some writing, and we do some really fun work about who we want to be when we grow up. So those are the two ways that I help people become more aware of themselves. So yeah, does that answer your question?
No, it absolutely does. Backing up just a little bit, I know we talked about this earlier. Could you go over the 10 areas of life? What are the 10 different areas?
I'm going to have to think about my diagram here for a second. There are two rings in the Founders Thriving Compass, and the outer ring are external factors. So the first one is family. So my relationship and how, if you think of each one of these as buckets, like how full is your family bucket right now on a scale of 1 to 10? you look at your very close relationships, maybe your partner, maybe your biological family, maybe you have a family of your own. So family, social, environment, career, and finance. Those are the 5 on the outside. The inner ring is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And then the center ring is pure being. So essentially, how happy would you be if if you lost your health, if you lost your job, if your family was no longer able to live with you, if everything was taken away? Quite literally, how much do you love yourself with nothing else there? That's what pure being is. But the other 9 buckets are much more quantifiable.
Thank you for that. Would you be able to talk about the pure being side, and what are some, I guess, proactive steps entrepreneurs or other people listening to this could take to, I guess, inch it in a more favorable way?
Yeah, so pure being, if you'll let me, I'm going to take one little quick sidestep and talk about religion versus spirituality. And I don't want this to be super triggery, and I want everybody to have whatever experience and feeling they want to have. But I just want to provide maybe a couple of little pieces of context. So, religion tends to be a group activity, it tends to have a leader of some kind, and there tends to be some rules, some dogma, and some ritual as a part of that. Almost all religions contain those things. Spirituality is not a group activity, it's an individual activity. There are no real rules or dogma because it's individual. You can practice spirituality in a group. You can go to a yoga class, you can go to spiritual events, but spirituality is all on the inside. So that's 2 kind of basic definitions. Now, if we take spirituality and we connect spirituality to pure being, as I mentioned before, and I asked you before, where does true happiness come from? You said on the inside. Now, how does that happen? How do we get to that point? If we look at the Vedantic perspective, we are, well, and actually science proves this, that we are all energetically connected. So you are you, I am me, but we are sharing the same energy. If you look at string theory, like we have all but proven through scientific method that we are all connected by the same energy. Now, if we drop underneath of that layer of energy, the Vedantic perspective believes that the substratum of everything is bliss. So imagine like underneath of all of our crazy thoughts, if we could just let it all go, everything underneath of that is bliss, happiness, joy, whatever word you want to use. I get to have a tiny little piece of that bliss and happiness inside of me. So that, in the Vedantic perspective, the substratum of everything is called the Brahman. My little piece of that that lives inside of like my heart center, what they call the Hridayam, I get to experience that anytime I want to. So if my deepest core is made up of happiness, all I have to do is turn my focus inward and do my best to study myself because I am at the very core happy. So the more I realize all of my thoughts, all of my emotions are not the true me, are not the true self with a capital S, the more happiness I get to experience. So your question was like, what can people do? I will tell you that there's a woman named Lisa Miller. She wrote a book called The Awakened Brain. She is a scientist at Columbia. She has said spiritual beings are 80% less likely to become addicted, 60% less likely to take our own lives, and spiritual beings develop more grit, resilience, perseverance, sense of community, altruism, and creativity. Now, here's the crazy part. When we think of like what are spiritual things that people can do, like you might think of meditation, you might think of going and sitting with ayahuasca in Peru, you might think of all the crazy things that I've talked about up to this point. But here are four things that she talks about that are the four most effective spiritual practices from her book are love of neighbor, altruistic service, listening to your inner wisdom, and rebooting our capacity for transcendent awareness. So none of those things require you to go to temple or church or like wherever. You can be a spiritual human being by simply being kind and grateful. So when you talk about pure being and how to address pure being, be a kind human being and learn about yourself.
Got it. So you can develop your inner self if you're able to focus on enhancing the external self, like such as being kind to your family and friends and just looking at the outer ring.
Yeah. Love of your neighbor, altruistic service, being of service, giving of yourself. One of the beautiful things that I tell a lot of the founders that I work with is that when we donate to others, when we focus on helping others, we're not focusing on ourselves. When we focus on ourselves, we'll always find negative things. When we focus on others, we forget about the negative stuff that lives inside of us.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have a piece of advice that you would give to someone who's just getting started in the entrepreneurial journey from a standpoint using your background?
Yeah. Very, very simply, the method that I use is the 80-20 rule. So for every 8 hours you spend working, you have to find 2 hours of self-care. And self-care is a wide door. Self-care is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Physical, go to the gym, do yoga, meditate, go for a walk, whatever. Like, I don't care. Mental, read books, learn things. Learn about yourself, learn about other people, learn about how other people are living happy, more productive lives. Emotional, find a coach or a therapist. Start doing deeper emotional work to learn about how you feel and who you are. And then finally, spiritual. Find a meditation practice, go to a yoga retreat, study teachers that have been dead for a very long time. This wisdom is not new. Nothing that I am saying here is my own. I am merely repackaging 4,000 years of Vedantic wisdom and trying to speak to entrepreneurs in a way that they will understand.
Is there a favorite book, or do you have a favorite business book that you'd recommend to entrepreneurs?
It is a little bit more of a sales book, but there's something beautiful in The Go-Giver. I love the idea of reciprocity. I love the idea of giving, and the important part of giving is that you also have to be open to receive. So some people that I work with have a really hard time receiving. And I think The Go-Giver is a short little parable about how to do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, GV, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Where can our audience get in touch with you to find out more about you and your business?
Yeah. The easiest place to find out information about me is gvfreeman.com, gvfreeman.com. It's got a lot of information about the services that I offer. If you are interested in joining us either for coaching work or to go on a Founders Thriving experience, so we have an experience in September for 6 days to Nicaragua. And we also are planning an experience for 2 weeks in Peru at the beginning of November. Both of those, you can find out more information at foundersthriving.com.
Awesome, GV. Thank you so much. I'll put all this in the show notes for everyone that's listening. GV, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.